So welcome everybody to TAM Lab 89. So in this session, we're going to be talking to Bassem about migrating an existing NSX-V environment to NSX-T using the migration coordinator. One thing I would like to say is that we strongly encourage customers to submit their ideas. So if you have an idea for a TAM Lab, please do reach out to your TAM and they can speak to us and we can look to get that session arranged. Bassem, over to you.
Yep. Cheers. Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think I'll start with by sharing my screen. Sure. Yep. Stay here. I need to share my. Okay. No, sorry. Yeah, share screen. So yeah, so we'll start. We have got 1 hour, and we'll start by just a quick walkthrough the slide deck, which just give you a general idea about the different migration options we have. And then at the end, we will have a 24 minutes demo, which I recorded on my own lab, which will deep dive into the migration coordinator in action, so you can see how it works. After the session, if you've got Q&A, feel free to submit them, as James hinted out. And if you want to connect with me offline after the session, if you need to get more information about the migration coordinator, how you can utilize this for your customers or advising your customers in using migration coordinator, feel free also to do so. So yeah, the agenda. First, we need to understand why to migrate. You need to make sure that you understand the needs to migrate from the current NSX-V to T environment, so you can talk with the customer, start discussions with the customer about this as soon as possible. Then we need to know a bit about the migration strategies, the tools which are available, and then how you can determine the best migration strategy for your customer case. As I said, the focus will be here in the TAM Lab about the migration coordinator. But yeah, it might, after the session, you might find out that it's not the best migration strategy for your customer. So that's why important that you understand also the different strategies that we have, so you can start the right discussion with your customers. We'll see then the different migration approaches, the V2T coexist, lift and shift, or using Hcx, and the V2T in-place migration, which is the migration coordinator. And then we see the demo, and then, well, just some resources, and then we've got the Q&A. So first, why do you need to migrate, or why your customers need to migrate from the V2T deployments that they might have? First, because the end of general support will be January 16th for 2022 for NSX-V. There's some work being done because we've got some requests from different customers that this is kind of a tight date, so they would like to have an extension. But even if the extension will happen of the support, if we get extended support for an NSX-V, this doesn't mean that your customer should stop planning or should not start planning the migration, because it's not just about the support of the product, it's about the solutions and the portfolio of solutions that can integrate with NSX-T and cannot with V. So think about the whole Kubernetes Tanzu discussions, federation. NSX-T is the building stone for all the future and upcoming vision realization of VMware. So this is one of the main reasons. So it's not just about support or end of life. So what you need to migrate V2T? Well, basically your workloads, your applications, your VMs which are running, your gateways, and your network services, like if you've got load balancers, if you've got VPNs and so on. So this all needs to be migrated from V2T. So what are the migration strategies available? So in-place migration, which is on the existing hardware, and this is the focus of this session, which basically means the customer doesn't need to buy any extra hardware to run a parallel environment where they can migrate the workloads. They can do the migration on the current existing hardware. Well, cost savings, this is one of the things. Actually, this is one of the main things. Plus, the migration coordinator as a tool is free. It comes already within your NSX-T offering. So if the customer has got NSX-T, then he doesn't need, or they don't need to pay any extra cost if they want to make use of the migration coordinator. The second option is coexist, which means yeah, you will be actually building a greenfield environment, which is running NSX-T. And for a while, your customer will be running an old workloads or workloads on the old NSX-V environment, while any new workloads that needs to be spin up, those new workloads will be spin up on the new NSX-T environment. So you will be running, or your customer will be running the two environments in a coexistent mode. Well, yeah, we call it kind of lift and shift. Well, the main idea here was that you will be doing the migration manually. Manually means you will be doing you will be setting up, or your customer will be setting up the new deployment, the greenfield, configure NSX-T manager on their own, deploy the NSX-T components like the tier 0, tier 1 segments, discrete firewalls, everything will be manual. And then they start doing the migration by any means, like storage, vMotion, whatever migration methodology that they want to use. So it doesn't really matter, but they will coexist for a while. The third option, which is coexist Hcx, which is basically they will utilize our Hcx to perform the migration. There's, of course, advantages to using Hcx. Well, it's can migrate some of the current NSX or NSXV configuration, not all of them, because there is some work that also needs to be done. Hcx is not able to migrate, for example, distributed firewalls for your customers. So you'll have to script this part, for example, if you want to migrate the distributed firewalls from the NSX-V to the new environment. But Hcx fits with the whole picture of site migration. So if you go to our PSO, if our professional services will be performing kind of this migration, they will go for Hcx. You have to set up special networking between the old site, which is running NSX-V, and the new site, which is running NSX-T, to be able to facilitate the communication between the two sites till you migrate the workloads completely from the V to T environment. Hcx is not free, of course. There's licenses that you need to license the destination site only. You don't need to license the source, but destination. But there's costs which are included with the Hcx method. So again, how to determine the best strategy for the V to T migration? Yeah, here it's a bit. I wouldn't say confusing, but we focus on in-place migration. But you see here, the first method is called rip and replace. The second one is using migration coordinator. What's actually rip and replace? Rip and replace simply means you just, downtime, you decommission the whole environment, the NSX-V environment, remove the NSX-V modules, everything, and then you redeploy the NSX-T on top of the old environment, and then just have it a whole new clean environment. Very aggressive. Doesn't really work for your customers. At least I haven't seen anyone favoring this approach. But the other favored approach for in-place migration is basically the use of migration coordinator. It's a neat method of doing the in-place migration because you need to install the NSX-T manager on the same infrastructure. You enable the migration coordinator service, and you start the migration, and it starts migrating in place. So the same host. So it starts by a whole simple idea of how it works. Just migrates the VMs off host number one. Just an example. Removes the NSX-V modules from that host, installs the NSX-T modules, and just moves back the VMs to that host. This is on the host level, but of course it's much more complex, as we're going to see, because you don't just migrate the host, but you migrate the edges, you migrate the firewall policies, which are supported. There is actually in NSXT 3.1.1, which was released yesterday, there is phase 2 in supporting virtualized automation NSX workflows that can be migrated with migration coordinator, but you have to be very careful about this point, because the official support for that is if the customers are running virtualized automation 8.3, which has still not actually released yet, but yeah, as of the date of what we speak in at the moment. But migration coordinator is a neat tool embedded within your NSXT environment. Support I would say wide range of topologies, but they support 5 main topologies, but they should cover a good amount, let's say, of customer deployments. So It also supports now since 3.1 the migration of guest and network introspection services. So if your customer is making use of network or guest introspection, this can be migrated also with the migration coordinator. It has a embedded pre-checks that it runs before the migration actually take place. So it's very handy that you can start the migration coordinator and see if your customer environment can be migrated or not using migration coordinator. This doesn't have any downtime, and we'll see it in the lab. It just do some pre-checks, and it gives you a report to tell you if what needs to be migrated, what needs to be not migrate, sorry, what needs to be changed, if there's any issues that can block the migration, if the environment is compatible or not. So you can actually run it in an inventory phase to see if the customer topology is eligible or can be migrated using migration coordinator or not. Yeah. So again, the lift and shift on our Hcx environments. Again, those are, for example, I'll tell you when we actually think about the Hcx or use this. Usually we think about VCF, for example. VCF environments cannot be migrated, at least the NSX part. You cannot use migration coordinator there. VCF is a whole different level of product coexistence. Sorry. So if you do a VCF migration, let's say from 3.9 or 3.10 to 4.2 or whatever, Hcx will be used. So yeah, there are some cases where you cannot use the in-place migration. Okay. Yeah, this is just a quick here comparison, let's say, technical comparison about technical requirements for the different solutions that we talked about. Interesting, a lot of stuff, but what I find useful to discuss with my customer or helps more is actually the next slide, is this one, where it basically, if you focus on the migration coordinator part, you can see here the set of the features which are supported, or features usually that you find in the customer deployment, and you can see if it's supported or not. And I tried to add some of the differences between what's in 3.1 or 3.1.2. And migration coordinator versions follow the same NSX-T version. Yeah? So if you say migration coordinator 3.1, this is basically the migration coordinator service that comes with NSX-T 3.1. So you don't have separate release notes. They are the same release notes of the major NSX-T release. So what I usually do with my customers is use, if we decide that we will go for the migration coordinator, I use this Excel sheet here to see what features do they have, and if this will be covered or supported by the migration coordinator, yes or no. Okay, and this is here more for the lift and shift, but again, as I said, it's not the focus of this session. So some of the migration approaches, the lift and shift, I'm just adding, again, talking about them so you have a complete idea of what are the options we have or approaches. This is the coexists part where you can run in new deployment, in new hardware, and start by time, you can start moving. You've got lift and shift here, or using Hcx, which basically means you are going to decommission the site right away. So you plan a window or a migration window and just migrate your deployment using Hcx to the new environment. The thing about the lift and shift, the concept of coexistence, either it's lift and shift or Hcx or whatever, is that you need, for example, your firewall rules, this needs to be migrated manually by means of scripting, for example. Okay, one of the good things about, or major things of the migration coordinator, that your distributed firewalls will be migrated automatically when you use the in-place migration or the migration coordinator tool. So that was first the configuration of the infrastructure, okay, and then here the workloads. Then you can utilize whatever method you want, either storage vMotion or Hcx will do it for you, whatever. But as I said, you need to have sort of also internet working connectivity between the two sites. Usually this is done by using what we call Nsxt Bridges. So you can have layer 2 connectivity between your old site and your new site here. So yeah, you can still have the connectivity till you finish the migration. Okay, and this is if you use the Hcx. I'm intentionally going fast through this slide because this is not the focus of this TAM lab. How you need to accompany your customer during the migration journey. You need first to understand the use cases and the current design. I always recommend to my customers to have or build a lab environment to test and see if, for example, the migration, if we decide to go to the migration coordinator, if this will satisfy the requirements, because you've got some customers or a lot of customers, their environment are not that neat or straightforward. You may have some environments where customers has, for example, played around with or inserted some static routes on their VM kernel port levels for V10 issues, for example. Some stuff that you need first to make sure that what the customer has will be migrated and can be covered with the migration coordinator. The team that needs to will be carrying out the migration, which means that they will also be the administrators, need to have a decent knowledge of NSX-T. NSX-T is a total different beast than V, so a whole different concepts. So they need also to be trained. And then, yeah, as I said, you have to, for a while at least, run in your test environment the NSX-T, just to understand it, just to get used to it. And then finally, when you make sure that you cover or your customer has covered these, points, then you can carry out the actual migration from V to T. The migration coordinator offers in the same time config and workload migration in one go. So with the other concepts, as you said, you have to first you migrate the configs, and then you migrate the workload. And migrating the configuration, it's not always an automated process. Remember also the example of the 3 to firewall rules. If you're going to use Hcx, then this needs to be manually migrated by means of scripting or whatever. In migration coordinator, it migrates the configuration of the V environment plus the workloads in one go. So it saves you and saves your customer time and work. So, and this is basically what we're going to focus on from now on, is the in-place fully automated migration using the migration coordinator. So this is the feature of why you go for the migration coordinator. As I said, it's built-in tool, really minimal downtime, and the downtime here, which I can think of, is just like switching the north-south traffic from the old edges to the new edges, for example. It's an in-place, doesn't require any new hardware, automated for both config and workloads, and it's very functional, and it supports very nice and very handy pre-checks that you can run at any time, non-disruptively, to check if the environment is eligible to be migrated to a migration coordinator or not. Offers topology view, so you can see how your environment will look like after the migration, and it's fully supported, of course. If your customer, conforms within the 5 supported topology, then it's fully supported, of course. So this is actually how these are the stages of the tool. It first checks some prerequisites, does some pre-migration configuration, migrates the configuration. This is, as I said, this can be used as an undisruptive assessment tool till step number 3. It's non-disruptive. Then you can, if everything is fine, if you resolve any conflicts, then you start with migrating the edges. I mean, when I say you, I mean the tool starts migrating the edges. And even till this point, you can do a rollback, basically. So if you migrate the edges, if your customer says, no, I want to roll back, then you can roll back without, or with a minimal downtime, because again, you need to shift the traffic from the new edges to the old edges. But it's a very minimal downtime. So and this is also the GUI. So it's very neat. The last step, which is the rollback, is not possible, at least from the GUI, is if you start with the host migration. This is actually where the tool will remove the old NSX-V modules from the host, installs the new ones, and start migrating workloads. So this one is not, the rollback is not supported, and if anything goes wrong, then your customer needs to work with support to resolve the issue and continue with the migration. So first, the prerequisites. Again, remember this slide which I shared with you. This may have, if your customer decides to go to the migration coordinator, they have to make sure that they conform with those requirements. So this is basically what we mean by the prerequisites, make sure that they are running the proper, the minimum supported version, minimum 644 NSX-V and the vSphere. I'd say, yeah, I mean, the minimum now should be like 6.5. Even customers 6.5 should be upgrading anyway. You have to make sure that there are no running or pending tasks before you kick in the migration coordinator in the environment. So make sure that the environment is stable. There is no alarms, no warnings. Make sure also that on the NSX-V environment is stable, all on green, and during the lab we'll see also this, of course. Make sure that no pending host reboots, no upgrades, no patching is being done in the background. And yeah, you'll need, of course, to deploy your NSX-T manager cluster, because from there you will start the migration coordinator. So yeah, how to start the migration coordinator. The service is not enabled by default, so you'll have to start the service from the command line of the NSX-T manager. Then it will start, when you start the tool, it will read the current NSX-V environment configuration, it will report any conflicts, and then you will have to resolve the conflicts. It's a very intelligent tool, and the way it reports the conflict, it also reports a recommendation on how to resolve the conflict. So you will know what you need to fix to be able actually to go forward with the migration. So, and this is here the migration when it's done. This is here migrating the config. It's basically copying the NSX-V configuration to the NSX-T. Again, non-disruptive, and up till this point here, you can see if your customer environment can be migrated or not, and you can, of course, as I said, do a rollback from this point. So this is the edge migration. So this is here your old NSX-V deployment. You see, like here, you're using equal cost multipathing for your network, for your edge service gateways. Once you migrate, this will be migrated in the form of a T0 gateway, excuse me, with 2 NSX-T edges. And it just shows you how it will look like. What we recommend at the moment is, of course, the migration supports both. Well, you can say, I want to migrate the old VDS or old NSX-V configuration to NVDSs. But what we recommend is, if your customer can upgrade to vSphere 7, if they are not on 7, and make use of converged VDS, please do so before you do the migration, and make use of the converged VDS from now on for your NSX-T workloads. NVDS will be phased out. So yeah, just to save your customer and yourself double the work, if you have the option, or your customer have the option to upgrade to vSphere 7 and make use of the VDS 7.0, please do this, and make sure that you in your NSX-T environment, that you make use of the converged VDS instead of the NVDS. It makes your life and your customer's life much easier. So yeah, as I said, you do the edge migration to the new edges. It will reroute the traffic from the old to the new, from the old to the new environment. Sorry. At this point, you can still do a rollback, but again, you might have a bit of a traffic disruption, because the traffic needs to be rerouted from the new to the old in case you want to do a rollback. Last step, which there is no rollback from that point, is migrating the actual hosts. And you can see here how it's done. It implements modes, evacuates the hosts, removes, it actually removes the VIPs from V, and then you install the NSX-T modules, and then you do at the end rebalancing of the workloads. So you move back the VMs, and you make sure that the VM per host ratio is kind of balanced. Important point, before you start the migration coordinator, you have to make sure that the cluster that you need to migrate, because you can do the migration per cluster, vSphere cluster, you have to make sure that the DRS is fully automated. Otherwise, you get an error in the migration coordinator. So it's important that you have to make sure that your DRS is set to fully automated. The supported 5 topologies, which we talked about for the migration coordinator. This is the first topology. If you have your, and we support at the moment only BGP for migration. yesterday we've got NSX-T 3.1.1, and I believe OSPF support came on your T0s. To be honest, I haven't had the time to see if migration coordinator can do also OSPF migrations or not if you're using 3.1. So I'll park this point for now. But for now, let's assume or let's focus on that the supported routing protocol is BGP and static routing, of course. So this is the first topology. If you've got edge service gateways in high availability mode, if you're on the migration coordinator and you've got your distributed logical router, this is how it will look like. Sorry, in the new topology. So you've got the T0 with two service router instances, for every edge here, and you've got your DR component as well. If your old topology was making use of ECMP, it could cause multipathing, then this is how it will look like in active mode, basically, because you're utilizing all the uplinks. Topology 3, this is how it will look like in the new one here. Topology 4, if you're making use of load balancers, it's also supported. So if you're making use of load balancers on your T1s, well, yeah, we didn't have T1s, of course, and but in the DLR, this will be migrated to a T1 component because load balancers in T can only be hooked up to T1s. So you have here a logical load balancer here with a service interface connected to this to a T1. And then another one if you've got your workloads hooked up directly to the edge service gateways. This is how it will be realized in the destination topology. Yes, so these are the 5 supported topologies. As I said, you don't have to feel the pressure to check this manually. If you just fire up the migration coordinator tool, make it scan the customer environment, totally non-disruptive. It will tell you if the environment can be migrated or not. So this is here basically the slides. Let's now see the lab. So I'll start here the video. I recorded the video because I thought it would be easier to just comment on the steps rather than doing it one by one, just also to make sure that everything works, nothing breaks. Now, so yeah, so this is basically how we start. This is your NSX-T environment, which, as I said, you need, of course, first to deploy it, to deploy your, I'll just pause this one for a second. So first you need to deploy an NSX-T manager that you will going to use. And at the next step is to connect to the vCenter under which there's the clusters, the NSX-V clusters that you want to migrate. And this is what we are doing here. So what we're doing is the first step after we deploy the NSX-T manager. I didn't record this point because, I mean, it's very straightforward and doesn't have much to do with the migration coordinator. But once you deploy NSX-T manager, log into the interface and now go to Fabric and to add your vCenter that has the NSX-V. So continue here. So it has been added. I believe it just needs. Yeah, it's still in progress in registration and connecting to the VCSA. Yeah, now see it's registered and it's in an up status. So what I was doing here is basically we need to create. Yeah, this is one of the things. Just I'll pause here for a second. So while after you add the vCenter that you need to migrate, you have to create IP address pool for the tunnel endpoints addresses that will be used by the nodes when they land in the NSX-T environment. So there's a taps you have to create an IP, and that's what we're doing now. We'll be configuring tunnel and IP address pools for the taps and for the edges, of course, as well, of the new environment. Because when you migrate the old one, you will have to have addresses assigned in the new environment, and the addresses or the IP pools that you configure here, you have to make sure they are reachable between the old and new environment. So the new edges, when they come up, they will get addresses. The taps they still have. You have to make sure that they still maintain also connectivity to the old edges as well. So this is what we're doing here, configuring the IP address pools that we're going to use for the tunnel endpoints and edges. So this is for the tunnel endpoints. So now I'll here make a short pause. So after I created the tap edges or the tap IPs that will be used, at the second step here is we have to deploy the edges of NSX-T, but we have to deploy them manually, and you have to leave them unconfigured because they will be configured by the NSX-T manager later on or the migration coordinator later on. So in NSX-T you can deploy the edges from the GUI. So you can go for the NSX-T and then Fabric and Edge nodes, and you provision the edges. Don't do that for the migration coordinator because you need to have an empty edges deployed manually so the migration coordinator can use them. And this is what we are doing in this step. So you need to download the edge appliance from my VMware portal and then import it and then deploy it as an OVA under the cluster that you want to migrate. And this is what we are doing here. So this is the NSX Edge appliance. You just deploy it and you register it manually to the NSX-T and leave it for the migration coordinator to configure it. Yeah, because I in the lab I have had already deployed one of them, so I just was showing here. Just this step is only for illustration, but I have in the lab I have had already deployed an edge node. So just a standard way of deploying an OVA. Just pick the size that you want. This is just a lab, so yeah, pick small or medium, doesn't really, yeah, it's just a lab environment. But of course, in a real scenario, you have to make sure that the new edges matches what the old service gateways or edge service gateways that the customer is running. And here just setting up the 4 interfaces for the edge. So the first one and then the rest is all just networking connectivity. You have to understand which interface will hook up to which port group. And have to ensure, of course, that whatever you configure for that edge needs to be able to reach the old environment or the old edges. So this one is running. Okay, so I've got some Q&A. I'll leave it here, and then we'll go on there. So this is all part of setting up the edges. I already have 2 questions in the Q&A. As I said, I'll go through them after once we finish. Yeah, I'd say, to be honest, the step of adding the manager IP. So if I pause here, if you see the step, the couple of, I go a bit here back, the steps of configuring or the manager, I'd say, let me pause it. Leave it. Don't do it from here. I have included already in the steps later on. You'll see that how we do it from the command line of the edge to register to the NSX manager. You can also add it from here. But yeah, it's part of the deployment. If there is anything that might go wrong, you might not really know what's the issue. So if you want to connect or register the edge node to the manager, so I'd say skip it, skip this part, and we'll see it later on in the lab when I connected manually the edge node to the manager. So I'd say skip it, but just for you to know that it's you can also have or connect the edge node directly to the manager after the node is configured and is brought up. And this is for the management interface of the edge. Okay, another question. I'll just leave answering the question to the last, as I said, so I don't want people to get bit less focused with the video if I start with the questions. So, but please keep your questions coming, so you can finish. So yeah, so this is at the end. When you finish, you just finish. Now I stop the video because I stop the recording because I've already deployed the node, and this is how you see how we will be connecting the edges manually to the T. So you connect SSH to your edge node. You see that it's not connected to any managers. You need to get the certificate here from your NSX-T. Yeah, typo. Yeah, always works. Just highlight, right click. It's much better than typing. So copy the certificate. And here's the fully qualified domain name. And then you need to add the thumbprint. For some reason, and you'll see it here, when I use the fully qualified domain name, took a long time and did not work. I don't know why. Although I have DNS and DNS is working 100%, but I don't know. So you'll see here in the steps, I had to just to use the IP address, and then it works fine. I don't know, maybe just we needed some time, or it was something with the name resolution, not 100% sure. But you'll see here I'm stopping the video or the recording, and then the next step, you'll see that the join has been successful, but I have used the IP instead of the fully qualified domain name. Yeah, so you can see here I stopped the recording, and then here just let me pause this for a while. So you see here now it's when I used this one, it gave me just some error. I don't know why, but now I use the IP of the NSX-T manager, and then it was successfully joined to the fabric. Now, if you do get managers, you can see that it's connected to the so the NSX-T manager that we have. And this is the manual step of, and this is all what you need to do when it comes to the edges. So, and this is now checking that the edge has been configured. If you go to the T environment fabric and then your edge nodes, you could be able to see that the edge, the NSX-T edge has been created. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. The migration coordinator needs an empty edge node, because this is where it will copy the configuration from the edge. And you can see it's not configured. It just registered, but it's not configured. And don't do anything extra. The migration coordinator will handle the rest of the work. So now go to the vCenter, check that you've got no alarms, no jobs are running. Make sure that everything is green, everything is fine. You don't have any issues. The alarms now also clean. Make sure that you don't have any running tasks. And I also advise my customers that to open a proactive SR, minimum 10 days before they start the migration. This here step is SSH into the NSX-V. I was trying to clear the screen, but yeah, I could have used the putty here option to clear it, but a bit of an Linux. So I was trying to see if clear will work, but no, it doesn't work. So yeah, I have to do it then from here. So this is the steps just to verify that all the NSX-V nodes are healthy. I'll just pause here for a second to highlight this. So I have got NSX-V installed and running in this here as a workload, as a data plane on this cluster and called production. And that's why you can see there's only a couple of hosts, which is host 3 and 4, that has NSX-V enabled. And that's what we're going to use or to migrate. So that's why just to show you that 1 and 2, it's purely a management cluster. So it's not licensed for NSX, and I'm not running NSX workloads in this cluster. So what we're doing in this step is basically checking the health, the NSX-V deployment health of hosts 3 and 4. So we before we kick in the migration, we make sure that the hosts are healthy and you don't have any alarms. And this is how you do it basically. So you go to show clusters, all details from NSX-V. Then you can see here what the command that we're going to use to check on the host health one by one for 3 and 4. So this one is healthy. You do the same for the other host. And this one is also healthy. So this looks good. So this means that, yeah, these two hosts are fine. We go to the NSX-V environment again to make sure that everything is green, that you don't have any warnings, any alarms. Yeah, the unprepared cluster, that's the management cluster. See, everything is on green here. The NSX managers, the controller nodes, any other components and DLRs, logical segments, everything is fine. And this is very important that you need to check these stuff or the status of your NSX-V deployment or environment before you kick in the migration coordinator. Yeah, and now. Yeah, I know I need to work a bit on my video editing skills apparently, but it's yeah. So it's one of the things here why I stopped the video is because you need to make sure also that you have. I also added it here to be proper practice that you have to make sure that NSX-V configuration is backed up before you kick in the migration coordinator. So it's not a must, but it's one of the best practices that I also include in any migration runbooks which I offer to my customers. A very important step is to make sure that your NSX-V environment is backed up before you kick in the migration, because if anything went south, so you can restore from backup. It's a best practice. So that's why I just wanted to also highlight it in the video. And yeah, this is just how you configure here the backup. If you don't know for NSX-V, you have to do it from the NSX-V management interface. And this for the V, of course. You go and define your FTP server. One of the things, Migration Coordinator doesn't support FTP, so you have to define SFTP. So if you want also to carry along the backup server configuration from the V to T, you have to use SFTP and not an FTP server. In my case, it was an FTP, and you'll see the alert about it in the Migration Coordinator. So these are the two hosts again that we're going to migrate. What I'm doing here is the following. So what I'm doing, and let me just pause this for a second. One of the prerequisites or requirements of using Migration Coordinator to be able to migrate the distributed firewall rules. And here, that was, I forgot to be honest to show it, but I had to simulate, but this will see it after the migration is done. I had already configured two firewall rules, distributed firewall rules, just to show you that it also will migrate them. To be able to migrate the distributed firewall rules using Migration Coordinator, the firewall rules needs, the distributed firewall rules needs to have an export version of 1000, which is the default, but we need to check them. So before you start the migration, you have to make sure that all your hosts that have distributed firewall rules, all the export version of the distributed firewall rules on them is all set to 1000. How you do this? By SSHing or logging to every host individually that you will be migrating, and run this command. And then you can check using this command every line here, and just you'll get that they are all 1000. So that's, yeah, that's correct. If not, then you'll have to change the value back to 1000. Non-disruptive will not cause any issues to the traffic flow on the host if you do this. If your customer is really paranoid about that, move the VMs from that host before you do the change, and then do that distributed firewall export change. Most of the time, you should not need to do it, but with large deployments, I have one of my customers, relatively large deployment. We have found some hosts which they had different distributed firewall export version than 1000, and those needed to be changed. So continuing the video. So this is how you check distributed firewalls. Make sure that they are all 1000. Now I'm connecting to the NSX-T manager to enable the service the migration coordinator service, because as I said, it's by default disabled. So connecting here to the manager to enable the service. So this is the service has started. Now you log into your NSX-T interface. Go to system and then migrate. Under lifecycle management, and then you should see the three options, those three migration options that you will get. One of them is migrating vRealize automation NSX workflows or objects, but this is again from vRealize automation 8.3, NSX for vSphere or vSphere networking only. So we pick NSX for vSphere because we are going to migrate the whole clusters running NSX-V. So yeah, here I'm showing you that the DRS a mode needs to be fully automated on the cluster that will be migrated. And here we're going to use the migrate the production cluster, make sure that it's fully automated, because this is needed while the migration coordinator is moving the VMs off the hosts and rebalancing the loads. So it needs to be fully automated. If not, you will get an error anyway in the prerequisite check phase when you run the migration coordinator. So you go back to system. And then we pick the one for vSphere, get started. Now you need to select NSXs. Basically here you give the information of your compute manager, which is your vCenter, under which the Nsxv environment is running. And here you put the credentials for the Nsxv. Yeah, now you can see that the authentication has been successful. You can start now importing the configuration by clicking on Start. And you can see that also, so you can view the imported topology as well to make sure that it conforms with the supported topologies. You can see everything here is successful, so this is okay. And then you can move forward to the next step by clicking on Continue. You can see here the configuration issues that needs to be resolved. As long as you don't get any red triangle, this means all these things are resolvable in a neat way. So yeah, you see that I've done a pose for the video. I have to resolve also some stuff in the background. You can see here tells you that these hosts cannot be migrated. Yeah, that's fine. We know because we don't, as I told you, it's a management cluster. Here you need to set the TAP VLAN ID for the NSX-T edges. As here you need to also specify some values like the overlay transport zone ID that you're going to use, or yeah, this is the transport zone actually that I had it already created also in the NSX-V actually before part of the configuration. This is the SFTP part, which I told you about, that NSX-T supports only the SFTP as a backup. Role migration is only supported if you use VIDM, but I didn't set up. So I'll just pause this. I'm going too fast, sorry. Yeah, so I didn't set up VIDM here, so that's why I just, you can skip it. So basically you will not be doing any role migration. If you want, then you have to use VIDM. The step here, which was I went through it too quickly, was actually assigning an IP from the TAP, which we created, to the edge transport node. That's needed, and it's the IP pool which we created in the beginning. And this is just allocating the interfaces to the NVDSs of the edges, basically the uplinks.
Bassem, I'm just shortly interrupting because we are running
I
short on
noticed.
time. So everybody who wants to stay on is welcome to stay on. And Bassem, I think next step would be then trying to answer the questions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. And if anyone needs to drop, again, as I said, feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions. And thanks for being here.
Alternatively, any customers that are watching this video, please reach out to your TAM and they can connect with Bassem.
Oh yeah, of course. Thanks, James.
Thank
you. Yeah. And then it's just again for the role migration part. To some of the available roles. But yeah, I just you can skip it or select the values. Can be some default roles, but if you have roles, then other than that, then you have to have VIDM. So I was going step by step for everyone, but you can just skip it, and then you submit the changes after you have resolved the conflicts. And and then take some time because of the time factor. A bit move it a bit ahead. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, again, this is because of the IDM part. And then I decided, I say, you know what, I'll just skip it. So I went back to the resolution, and instead of migrating the roles as I did, I just used skip option. So I skipped them. And then, yeah, after that, if I click continue, yeah, it went ahead. So if you click on migrate, so this is all done here. See that the overall process of the migration config was done. The next step is here actually to start migrating the edges and the hosts. And you can see here that it migrated the distributed firewall rules. One of them was migrated, the sections as well. You can see security groups also can be migrated. Just a list of what has been migrated and the number of mapped objects that have been migrated. Now click on continue, and this is where it will start migrating the edges. So as you can see here, it says it will disrupt the traffic. And then if everything is fine, you can click on start and start migrating the edges. And this is where the NSX-T manager will start configuring the edge that we already created. Here it's done. You can still see that up to this point, we can roll back from the edges. And you can see the migration status has not yet started. 0 warnings. So it has done the edge migration successfully. Click on continue, and now it will start the host. Now, one thing, you have here the 2 groups, which is the 2 clusters that we have. As you can see, one of them is don't migrate, one of them one of them will be migrate. You can actually choose the order of migration within the cluster. So you can do a parallel migration or serial. So you can do parallel, like the multiple hosts in the same time, or one by one. And the default and recommended migration mode is maintenance, meaning from the name is obvious, it will place the host in maintenance mode to ensure that there is no workload or traffic disruption. And then it will, after the NSX-T modules are installed, then it will move back workloads. So you can see the migration is enabled for this cluster, which is called production. And the order is serial. You can change them if you want also here. Serial or parallel migration. Yeah, and then if everything's fine, then you click on start, and then it will take some time to migrate that. And you can see here the note about VDS7. And any workloads that are connected to the DVS directly will be migrated to NSX-T segments. And we'll see that later. And then you start the migration. It will take some time, and then it should be successful here. So you can see the hosts now are migrated, and they are running 701. And the migration that's successful, and progress is 100%, which means they are done. And this is you finish the migration, and then we'll see through the environment. Just the hosts. So any porter groups that you had in the DVS will be migrated to a segment. And since I had a question about the converged VDS, and this is what we have actually here in the lab, you will see that all the old DVSs, porter groups, will be logical segments, and you will see them automatically as a converged VDS porter groups. You don't need to do any migration. So it doesn't send them to NVDS and then migrate them back to CVDS. No, it will be automatically created as a converged porter group, but given that you have VDS7 before you start the migration. So checking the migration options, you see that the transport zones now have been created. This is the production transport zone, and that have been taken back from the NSX-V and overlay. And you can see the nodes are connected to this one because that was the original configuration. The transport nodes, now you can see these are the hosts, the 3 and 4. Now they are migrated, and this is an applied profile by the migration coordinator. It's a transport node profile, and you can see these are the addresses here of them. And this is the edge node, which we have configured before. And also edge cluster has been automatically created where the edge is running underneath it. And it's running in a hosted on a host ESX3. The segments here, you can see I had a web LS segment and some other segments created. The migration coordinator migrated them automatically, all of them, from the VDS to logical segments. And now if you go and check in the vCenter, you will see that the segments are created as a CVDS porter groups and it just adds the suffix ls after the name of the porter group. And this is what we're going to verify here. All what I need is just a couple of seconds, and we'll go through questions. So networking, you see here, they are all created with this small n. This means it's an NSX created group, and this is view of the CVDS. So yeah, that was basically the migration coordinator in action. Of course, it's a lab environment. Of course, in real scenarios, real life, you may face different challenges. But as I said, you can always run the tool to check for you the supported topology. The questions that we have, if I move to the question here, I will just show the last part was just showing, I believe, here.
Thank you, Bassem.
Nothing. Yeah, thanks, James.
So yes, so one of the questions is just, does the migration coordinator have the option to migrate from an NVDS to vSphere 7 VDS, or do we have to upgrade to vSphere 7 first?
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Yeah,
you have to upgrade. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you just covered that actually just towards the end there, didn't you? Perfect.
Yeah.
And do you have any tips and tricks for migration when NSX-V is part of a vCloud Director environment?
No, this is actually a very important topic, and I have internally, so please, Herbert, internally connect with me. I have, so now I cannot share much about it, but it's very challenging, especially for service providers. Please, Herbert, get in touch directly with me. I can connect you internally with some people who might give you a bit more insight about that, because it's, I don't think it's very straightforward as standard topologies. I'm not even sure that if it's supported, but this we have to take it internally.
Yep, thanks, Bassem. That's great.
No
And regarding the NSX team manager required for migration, before using the MC, is there initially just one node required for the NSX team manager cluster? Or
Yeah,
does it,
you can use one node or a cluster. That doesn't really matter. But of course, best practice is having cluster. If it's a production, then you should have a cluster. Of course.
Absolutely.
But I mean, in my lab, for example, I just use the single node.
Yeah, of course. Does anybody else have any other questions? No. Well, thank you very much, Bassem, for a brilliant session. We really appreciated it. Obviously, TAMs, please do reach out to Tina Krogel or myself if there are any session ideas from your customers, or if you need any assistance from Bassem in the future, we'd be delighted to hear from you and your customers. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.